it was the site of one of the biggest migrant centres in the whole of Australia. So it's a place where people who were refugees had come for years and settled in the town. There was this very strong mentality of a struggle town. One of the common things of a town with a struggle town mentality is that it starts to believe that there's some future event just around the corner that's going to save it. In the case of Wodonga, for over 100 years, they have been saying that when the railway line is removed from the centre of town, they will finally prosper. That only a struggle town would have a railway line running right through the middle of the town. So this was one of the big projects that they had in their mind. Now, this is very common, and I identify with the Wodonga story, and I said it's a metaphor for many of our life stories because, as was mentioned in the introduction, I came from a very, very marginal childhood. I went to 26 different schools, had the crap beaten out of me every single day of my life at school, from school bullies, etc., etc., etc. And for many, many years, I was like Wodonga. I was always looking, what's around the bend? If only I had this, if only I had that, if only this would happen. Not realizing that my childhood experiences was the wealth that I had to use in the now, in the present moment of time. I had to stop looking to the future. I had to work with what I actually had. And similarly in this town, they were looking to some future event. And thirdly, and these are not all the stories, but there was a story that this main street was an essentials-only shopping street. If you wanted a more cultural experience, you went across the border to Albury. Now, I could have paved this street in gold, and it would not have changed a single thing in this town. Does anybody know what happens to poor people when they win the lottery? They are poor within about 2 years. Because what happens is when they look in the mirror, they don't see a millionaire. When they look in the mirror, they see a poor person who has more money than they really deserve. And so for the image in the mirror to match the image in their head, they get rid of the money so that now they can see a poor person, again, with no internal conflict. Exactly the same thing happens in communities. Unless you can change the image that is in the mirror, it will not matter what you put in the street. Does that make sense? You have to deal with the image that is in the mirror before you can deal with what is in the street. Now, dealing with what is in the street can be an important part of that, and I'll show you an example of that shortly. But what I'm saying is that what your focus needs to be is changing the image in the mirror, not simply redesigning a public space. Now, what is fascinating to me is that limiting stories also get built into the urban form. In an exercise I do with planning professionals in a longer training format is to give them a map of an African village, and I ask them to look at that map and tell me what they can read about the culture of that tribe just from the map. It's an anthropological view of built spaces. And they'll come back and say it's a polygamous society, the chief loves his beer more than his first wife, they value cattle more than young boys, etc., etc., etc. All of that is read from the built form. Our built form is a body language that tells us about our beliefs, our mythologies as a total culture. So whatever you believe or whatever your culture is, whatever your limiting stories are as a city or a community, will get translated into the built form. So in this case here, we have right in the centre of town a supermarket. This part of the supermarket has a Liquorland, a liquor store behind it. And this might not be very clear, but here's a metre-high concrete bulwark along here, something you'd see in a war zone or at traffic works. Now, can anybody guess why the designer, the architect of this supermarket, decided to put the concrete bulwark there? Yeah, somebody right up the back. Yep, stop ram raiding. Now, nobody did a cost-benefit analysis of how much the wall costs compared to how many bottles of booze that have to be stolen. Every day when the residents of Wodonga walk past this wall, what is the story that this wall tells them? You bad, I can see it in your faces, you understand. It's saying to them, you are a thief, you are untrustworthy, you live in a Wild West town where even the booze is not safe. Does anybody know what happens if you tell people day after day after day that they're untrustworthy, that they're a thief? They believe it and they start acting that way. If you try to build urban environments to protect against particular behaviour, the funny thing is you actually end up encouraging it. I think I'm back. Now what is ironic about this is, have a guess where the undesirables in town hang out. Because we've created an environment in which they feel welcome. This is their kind of space, man. And all of the people who have actually got money to spend at Wodonga, guess where they avoid? They don't want to be walking past there because all the ferals hang out there and they get told every time they walk past that they're untrustworthy. Why would you go past a space like that? And in this case, the best way to address this story was to get this wall to tell a different story, and I will come back to that in a moment. So now to the cultural and social aspect of this. Once I understand the stories that a space is telling, the next question is, how do I break through that glass ceiling of limitations? How do I get this community to start telling a different story about themselves? And I believe that the most powerful way of doing that is always experiential. People have to have an experience that writes a new script within their brain. Now, I don't have time to go into all the reasons for that, but experience is the only way that we generally are triggered into telling new stories. And so for High Street, what we did was every Friday night during the daylight saving months, we ran an event called Lounging on High. And remembering that people's mental image of this street was an essentials-only shopping street, my charge was to turn it into the civic heart of the city. I had to give it a heart. It had to be a place where people wanted to go to socialise. And so we simply encouraged people to bring their chairs down and to lounge in the street on a Friday night. Very low-key event. We'd have some jazz music. Sometimes we'd have a featured winery. We actually got a permit for people to be able to drink in the street. This might be anti-intuitive to some of you, but we actually opened it up for people to actually act as if this was their lounge room. Okay, and in your lounge room, you kick back with your friends and you have a drink. And so that's what we were actually encouraging. We had theme nights where people could dress up, etc.